A night at Lowell Observatory on episode 288 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We're amateur astronomers who love looking up at the nighttime sky and ask, what is it like to look through the Clark 24-inch refractor? I sure wanted to know, Shane. How about you?
Oh, yeah, that's a dream come true. I can't even imagine. Something that large must be incredible.
Yeah. So I was very, I don't want to say jealous. I always feel like there's like this negative connotation. I wish I had been able to go observing at the Lowell Observatory with Clint, not in his place.
Yeah. Alongside him.
Alongside, exactly. So we had an email from Clint, who is a longtime correspondent and Patreon supporter. We appreciate that. And he recently visited Lowell Observatory just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, up on Mars Hill. And it was made famous for many reasons, Shane. So some of them were that, like, Percival Lowell in the early 1900s made observation sketches of canals and created a hypothesis for life on Mars. And for some strange reason, that captivated the public's attention.
Yeah, imagine that.
So, well, proven to be optical illusions. Nobody else would ever see optical illusions with Mars. Like, I recently heard of this guy that saw Mars get drained of blood while it was doing an occultation from the moon. But anyway, Lowell he inspired like a lot of astronomers, science fiction writers, and even though he was wrong, it had like a very positive impact on astronomy and people in general. It really inspired a lot of creativity. And, Lowell Observatory went on and had some great astronomers there. A lot of amateur astronomers who became astronomers, like the discoverer of Pluto, Clyde Tombaugh, worked out of there. And in 1930, that's when he discovered Pluto. And then Robert Burnham Jr. later worked there, starting in the 50s. And he's the guy who wrote Burnham's Celestial Handbook during 21 years there while working on the Proper Motion Survey. So, Lowell Observatory just is this, it's really just like in my opinion, it's like the amateur's professional observatory in many ways.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good description.
So it's pretty cool. So I don't know. Are you up for reading through it? Maybe what we'll do is just get you to read, just guesstimate maybe where half is, and we'll get you to read through half, and then I'll take over. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds good. So hi, Chris and Shane. This might turn out to be somewhat lengthy email. I recently got back from my vacation that I took to Flagstaff, Arizona, where I was able to spend a nearly new moon evening at the Lowell Observatory. I started the day in the afternoon with my family exploring the exhibits and checking out the various domes. The Pluto telescope was really quite intriguing. I also appreciated the newer display that they had dedicated to Robert Burnham Jr. His work on proper motion was fascinating. I also liked seeing the three volumes of his Celestial Handbook on display. These are three of my favorite reference books in my own collection. My family and I were able to catch the tail end of the final observing session for the day. The sun was just dipping into some trees as we got our chance to look through their solar telescope. I have had the chance to see the sun through a scope on other occasions, but it was a first for my family. While we were there, they also rolled back the building at the open deck observatory to reveal the incredible scope collection. Yes, you read that right. It is not a simple roll-off observatory. A roll-off roof observatory. They have a building that houses all of their public telescopes, and the entire building rolls back to expose the scopes to the sky. I want one. I think you should build one, Chris, for your observatory.
I think I want one too. That's awesome.
I took the family to dinner and got them settled in our Airbnb, and then my oldest son and I went back to the observatory to enjoy the rest of the evening. It was a bit on the cool side, about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so about -7 degrees to the rest of the world.
That is cold. I always think of Arizona as like shirts and t-shirt weather.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, wow. But the lines were still quite long for most of the activities. We waited in line about an hour and a half to look through the Clark refractor. It was tracking on Jupiter for the evening. I have to say, I was a bit disappointed. Perhaps disappointed is not the correct word. Maybe surprised is better. Surprised that the view through the big refractors and high-end scopes that they had set up was not much better than my own scope. This was the case for the night no matter which scope I looked through. If their scope was pointed at planets or stars, then I felt that my 4-inch tack was just as capable. In the Clark, they had Jupiter magnified roughly 300 times. It was certainly bigger than I usually observe it, but it seemed washed out. The color was more creamy and the banding was obvious, but seemed to blend from one zone to the next. There just was not as much contrast as I had expected. Maybe I'll pause there, Chris. I think that's about halfway.
Yeah, that sounds good, and I also think it's a good place to address this. And it's this point that we've talked about so many times, and it's a real world example. And I know that Clint really enjoyed his time there, as any of us would have. But what he is simply witnessing here is that often the sky will only show you sort of like the maximum that a 4-inch telescope is able to reveal, sort of on any moment to moment.
Yeah, exactly. Those nights of great seeing where you can throw as much magnification as you want are quite rare, but those are the nights where this large telescope, I think, would really show what it's capable of. The thing to remember, when you increase magnification or you increase aperture, you're also sort of increasing the effects of the atmosphere when you're observing. So sometimes more is not better when it comes to astronomy.
I think the other thing is, like, Clint goes on to say, from the Clark, we went back to the open deck and got a look at Mars through their 16-inch Meade. Where he also said he felt that perhaps his tack could have met, or it may have even bettered what they were seeing through that telescope. And then that they looked through, and this was the scope that I was actually just as interested to hear about as the views through the Clark, which is the 8-inch custom refractor, because that's one of those scopes that was made over in the UK. And it's like one of those beautiful, almost steampunk type telescopes. I think it's this beautiful crimson red. I've seen lots of photos online. I saw it when it was, they had designed it. I saw it when it was being built and then being installed at Lowell. So quite an interesting achromatic refractor. And again, he said that he was wishing that he could have set up his own scope to look through till his heart's content. And I think that's the main point, is that when you're out just looking through telescopes and you're waiting in line and then finally get to view, and I don't know how long they let people view for, but maybe like 30 seconds or something like that, maybe a minute if you were lucky. You're spending most of your time just waiting around and a very small amount of time observing. So the chances that you're actually going to get, unless it's an amazing night, really good views through any telescope, regardless of what it is. I think, like, he's hitting the nail on the head here, that his telescope, whatever it would be, is going to give him better views, because he's able to sit in an observing chair at his eyepiece for a long period of time and to be able to take in those views. As well, Clint's using a beautiful Takahashi telescope. So he's using a telescope, pretty much the same as what you and I use, Shane. And those telescopes, in my opinion, which is fairly extensive, they kind of give you what the sky can provide on any given night. Sort of like any average night, those telescopes are going to, as far as planetary detail goes, they're going to give you all the planetary detail that can be seen on a lot of nights.
Yeah, exactly. You can see an awful lot of detail on the planets with a 4-inch. Heck, even my TAC 3-inch. I used that exclusively during the last opposition, and I was able to see a lot of detail on Mars. It was quite incredible.
Yeah. So what Clint goes on to say is what really impressed me, though, was the deep sky views that their big scopes were giving. They point at their 32-inch Dob. That's something.
Wow.
Point at their 32-inch Dob on M15, and he said, I could not get enough. I went through the line several times. My refractor can show great views of bright objects like planets and stars, but the views of M15 through the big Dob were only something I could see in my dreams. It was glorious. It looked like it looked like glitter suspended in a 3D pattern in the sky. Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah, and that's where the 4-inch will fall down a little bit, is on some of those deep sky objects. You just can't beat aperture for some of that stuff.
Yeah. Clint goes on to say another highlight was the 17-inch plane wave. This is a completely computerized Dahl-Kirkham telescope. I've looked through either a 16 or a 19, something like that. It is connected to a camera and a computer monitor. The software shows that scope to take one 60-second image. And then it takes a bunch of images, I guess 61-second images, and then stacks them and displays them on a computer monitor. If you want to see something that is more dim, simply turn up the exposure time. It was really neat to see the live stacking of images as they came across the screen. The volunteer turned the scope on Andromeda and then panned to show M32, M110, since the field of view was too small in the main image to see them all at once with the main Andromeda galaxy. He then pointed it to the Ring Nebula, and he said color just popped with the image stacking. He then pointed out the Pinwheel Galaxy and pointed out supernova that had recently been spotted there. At this point, I was getting pretty cold, so I looked at M15 one last time and checked out for the evening. The evening was one I will never forget. I now have aperture fever and need a warming room complete with red lights. I am glad the experience confirmed just how good my little scope is. I am also glad that I was able to see just how limited it is on certain targets. I know that you are all working on an episode to discuss various ways of creating observing reports. What you have just read is basically how I record my observations. I don't write to you each time I have a session, but my observing journal is full of dates, and they describe things in paragraphs just like the above. Clear skies, Clint. Well, thanks so much, Clint. Thanks for this. As you know, I've always wanted to visit the Lowell Observatory, and I watched the shed being built, and I've seen it roll off in videos, and especially interested in the 8-inch refractor there. So it was really neat to be able to vicariously live through you, Clint. That was really a cool experience and a wonderful email to receive.
Yeah, I really appreciate it too. It's I love reading about other people's experiences like that, visiting various observatories. Another example is when Mark Radici was on and shared his time at that observatory near his hometown, which was fascinating.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I would love to get down to Lowell sometime and see all the instruments and that they have going there. I was also looking. They have a podcast. I think it's just really getting started, and there's like a video component to it as well. And they kind of were going and walking around recently and taking some shots. It was kind of neat just to see. Looks like they've made the grounds very visitor friendly. And as you can hear from Clint's email, it certainly is a wonderful spot to go and walk around and look through some fantastic instruments for an evening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very neat.
Anything to add? This is a bit of a shorter episode, but we just thought that was just such a great email, and we really appreciate Clint and everybody else who sends us emails, and just to be able to really read them and then talk through them a little bit more than maybe we have in the past, just to really take some time to show our appreciation to all of our listeners who decide to take the time to write us. All right. So if you enjoyed this podcast, then we would really appreciate it if you could do us a big favor and go ahead and leave us a positive review in your podcatching software or wherever, maybe over on Apple Podcasts. We certainly would appreciate that. And each review increases our chances that other people like you will find actual astronomy. So thank you so much for your support.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.